Welcome everyone to another episode of Cinematic Realms. I'm your host, John Webster. With me, as always, is my trusty co-host, Jared. How are you doing today, Jared?
I am doing great. As we were just talking about off air, it's been a very busy week, but positive developments all around, and being able to catch up on this movie and some of the other episodes of the Batman and the animated series has been one of the highlights. So very excited to dive into it.
Yeah, it was funny because today was the first. Well, it's the first time I've seen the movie in a little while, but also I think it was the first time that I've listened to the movie with headphones on. I think like every other time over the past few years, I've just probably watched it on the TV with the TV sound. And I was really able to take advantage of that, like that remastered, you know, uh, either DTS or Dolby Atmos. I'm not sure what it was, but uh, it was really cool listening to the sound design of this because you think, oh, it's certainly animated films are certainly allowed to have very aggressive sound mixes, but I think because this originated from a Saturday morning cartoon, you don't necessarily think of like a great sound design, but listening to it today, I was like, oh man, this feels like I'm seeing this in the movie theater. And I also had the privilege to watch the recently released 4K edition, and the colors and the lights really popped, off the screen for this. So it was a nice way to revisit it, and it felt big. We talked a bit about this last week, where this has a short runtime, especially among other Batman films, but it feels like a really big event. And even though I don't remember the occasion specifically, I know that I did see this in the theater, and so it kind of tapped into those sort of subconscious feelings of being a little kid and getting to see this in the theater. So yeah, no, it was really nice, and I was a bit groggy today, so it certainly woke me up when I turned it on. Yeah, I'm wondering, how long has it been for you since you've kind of revisited not just this film, but Batman the Animated Series?
Well, Batman the Animated Series is a staple show for me. It is one of my favorite television shows ever. So it's the kind of show where I will just throw an episode on randomly. I have a handful of favorites that I love to rewatch. But Batman the Animated Series in particular, it doesn't have the full it's not the kind of show where it's like you need to watch the entire series, which lends it to that kind of checking in and out. I mean, it's a great overall story, but the episodes themselves are pretty individualized. But there is a continuity, and the thing about Batman Mask of the Phantasm is it really feels like the quintessential episode of Batman the Animated Series. And it is one of the best Batman stories ever, I personally feel. So I revisit it frequently, but in particular, when I first saw it as a young kid, I was too young to have seen it in the theater. This movie came out in 1993. And we'll talk a little bit about its theatrical release strategy, which was not handled the best, you could say. But as a kid, I was obsessed with the Batman series. It was my introduction to Batman. And when I found out that there was a movie set in that universe, there have been several, but this was the first. I was very keen to see it, but I didn't get to see it until, probably when I was like 9 or 10 years old. So like 98, 99, thereabouts. And when I saw it, I thought it was basically just a very good episode of the animated series because there are some very specific themes that I was probably a little too young to grasp, but it was still a wildly entertaining story. But once I revisited it a few years down the line, I'm like, this is much better than I remember it. And then I revisited it another couple of years ago. I'm like, this is even better than I remember it then. And every time I'd rewatched it, it just went up in my estimation again and again and again until it had reached a level where I'm like, this is one of my favorite Batman stories, period. And Batman being such an important character to me and my love of serialized storytelling, I just couldn't hold it in a higher regard. And the moment that really stands out for me in recent years is, this movie was released back in December of 1993. So it was actually, I think, a week or two after we had had our Oppenheimer discussion, and we were planning on taking a little bit of a break. And because we were off and we were going to go on vacation. And I just happened to, be doing some Wikipedia scrolling, and I happened to see it's the 30th anniversary of this movie. 30. And that just, you've talked a lot about the passage of time and how surprising it is for you at some points. That knocked me on my ass. I'm like, 30 years of this movie? I've got to rewatch this. And I rewatched it, and it was probably my favorite viewing experience of the movie I ever had. And once I did that, I was just like, we got to talk about this on this channel. I've got to find a way to convince John. And turns out I did not have to work that hard to convince you because we hadn't talked about how much we love this movie, but this is a staple for both of us. And my rewatching it just this past week, I revisited it early in the week, and I'm like, this is so good. I've got to go delve back into a couple of my favorite episodes of the animated series. And I did that. And then I just capped it off by rewatching the movie again today. And damn, this is so good. And I can't wait to talk about why.
Yeah. Real quick, just want to say hi to Guilty Undertaker and Guilty Undertaker and also Laura. We appreciate you dropping in. Have fun. Have fun, you guys, recording your podcast. And it's I want to talk about like what it's hard because, as you said, 30 years ago. So it's hard. Like I said, I don't even remember the specific experience of sitting down in the movie theater to watch this. I just know that I saw it in theaters. I remember specifically that it was a theatrical event. Didn't have any idea about sort of the bundle release and, and that it was hard to actually get out to see. I was a little kid who was crazy about Batman the Animated Series, so of course I made it out into the theater to watch it. But I feel like I have always known that this was a very special film. And I would love to be able to pull from John's head back at that time, because this is right smack dab in the middle of the release of Batman Returns and then Batman Forever. So, and I know for a fact that that 11-year-old John actually really loved Batman Forever, contrary to the sort of, the way people look back on the film now. And I remember that was actually, that movie was quite the cultural moment for people. I think Batman and Robin kind of, tarnished you know, the fond memories that people otherwise might have had of Batman Forever, because it was like a big success at the time. But the reason why I mention that is because I'm interested about the John who like had a blast watching that movie and the goofy fun of that movie. And then there's a John 2 years before that came out who was really vibing with the really dark, moody, emotionally resonant themes of Master of the Phantasm. And it's just interesting to me that like for Little John, both of those things, were really valuable. But no, I think because this was, it's a dual story, and half of that story is the origin of Batman. So I think for any young fan, that's going to resonate. Just because that's not something we get to see in the animated series itself. And also the fact that it's like it's a quintessential story because of that, but also because then it ties together in the the present day story, bringing in the Joker, and any story with the Joker is, and he's not just the sort of the comic villain that he occupies like that position in a lot of episodes of the series, where it's going to be a wacky week because the Joker is causing problems for Batman. This was like an emotionally complex story, and the Joker is right at the heart of that. And so yeah, I just remember having such um yeah, I just remember even back then when I was 11 years old, this struck such a chord with me. And yeah, it's just it's one of my favorite stories. And the fact that like this may have given away something to me if I was paying attention, the fact that it is also a love story. Like, hey John, you might actually really like this kind of thing. Pay attention, it's clues to some of your movie preferences in years to come.
Mm-hmm. And not just a love story, but a tragic love story. And and Eric is right. Batman always has this duality. We like to think more on the dark, brooding, tragic, grittier side. He does have the campier, goofier side, and depending on your personal taste, there's a Batman story for you, all the way from Batman, the Batman and Robin movie, from the Joel Schumacher campiness all the way to like the hardcore Frank Miller stuff. So it's with Dark Knight Returns and the like. So it's and that's the joys and the benefits of any comic book character, is there are certain core points, certain canon events, shall we say, to borrow a term from Across the Spider-Verse earlier this year, that are central to any superhero mythos. But for Batman, as long as he's fighting crime in Gotham and dealing with an element of a tragic backstory and facing villains who are kind of reflective of his own tortured psychology in a certain way, it's going to be a Batman story.
I think I have to say, I think this is why I love the Tim Burton film so much, because I think Tim Burton, more than any other person to tackle Batman, has understood the delicate line to be traversed of Batman. Like, there can be a silly side to Batman, because at its heart, this is a guy dressing up in, a bat suit fighting crime. And, but then also there's a lot of emotional weight and darkness to be mined in the character. And his films really kind of balance on a knife's edge, sort of back and forth doing that. I think other directors have, planted their flag one side or the other,
Mhm.
from, and not just film directors, but television executives, because go back to the 60s Batman, and then also, obviously Joel Schumacher, and then Christopher Nolan, who goes the complete opposite direction, and now Matt Reeves of that, you know, that ultra serious, and I like that as well. The Dark Knight, absolutely one of my favorite, Batman films, and we did a stream about the Batman, the latest film, and we love that. But I think in my heart, I do love when there's just a little bit of, um, we're taking this seriously, but it can very quickly devolve to something utterly ridiculous, and so that's, I think that's why the Tim Burton films have always kind of appealed to me in that way, and of course one of, but I think that if you're looking for like the best true adaptation of
Mhm.
Batman, I think the animated series really
Yeah.
was able to dive into so many things that like other adaptations just can't. And I think part of that is because of the animated form.
Yeah.
We've talked before about, and with other franchises, how you can get away with things in animation that you can't get away with in live action.
Mhm.
Chief among them, we're talking about, this incarnation of Batman. You can
Mhm.
have him in the blue and gray,
Yeah.
and not have it be the ridiculousness of the 60s, television series.
Mhm.
Whereas with any, live action film, you tend to want to see him in the black because,
Yeah.
that's darker. It's
Yeah.
it's more serious. Um,
Yeah.
but there were so many things that this version was able to embrace that I feel like other live action films just haven't been able
Yeah.
to do it, um and then just the way the villains are done, and my love of the Tim Burton films also probably helps a lot with this, because you can see there's a lot of influence
Mhm.
of those films in the series and in this movie, but also it's mixing that with the source material.
Mhm.
And you know in the animated series, the penguin certainly looks like
Yeah.
Danny DeVito's version, but he's in a proper suit, and the top hat, which is present in
Mhm.
some scenes in Batman Returns, but it really harkens more towards like the classic idea of the character, so it's a great mixture of the two things, and same thing, like there's a little bit of inspiration with the costume for the Joker, but this is clearly a completely different thing
Mhm.
from Jack Nicholson's version, and which, by the way, we will talk about how iconic Mark Hamill yeah, Mark Hamill's portrayal of the Joker is. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you can't get any better. um,
Oh yes. Uh,
but yeah,
yeah.
interesting, because this is a great week to talk about like a 90s animated series slash film, uh another we had a revival of another 90s animated series this week, and I know you said you were going to wait until you uh, had a chance to revisit the original, but for anybody listening, let me just say that X-Men 97 is bleeping amazing. Everybody should be watching it. Um, but whereas that show was always very like serialized in the sense of like a story that like continued on, Batman the animated series, as you were talking about, didn't necessarily have uh, a long ongoing arc. There was continuity, but and references, obviously, to like character threads, and
Mhm.
stuff, but each episode very much was you know, you haven't seen the show before, you can jump in here and enjoy the heck out of it. Uh, and it's right. I'm just like, just as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that those two shows were on at the exact same time, and you know, along with a number of other shows. What a time to be a kid! Um, I'm just like really glad that I grew up, as a kid in the '90s. There was just so much to enjoy, but uh, but yeah, no, this is just such a landmark for so many things for uh, you know for children's television, but also appealing to an adult audience, and being such a important adaptation of the Batman mythos, um, and yeah, so I'm just waxing poetic now about the entire thing. We'll get into talking about the specifics of the movie in a second, but it bears gushing about because it's just such an amazing project.
Yeah, and it is one of the most beloved Batman properties ever, and rightly so. I will own my bias in the sense, or rather, I'll just own my time period. I was too young to have seen the Tim Burton Batman movies when they first came out, and by the time I was really like a big movie fan, the Batman movies that were in vogue were the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Though I actually saw the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight movies before I saw the Tim Burton Batman movies, and I personally love them both. I will say that when at that age, I was much more like Nolan's where it's at, and the Tim Burton Batman movies are nice too. I've my estimation of them has risen over time. And I'll even defend the Schumacher ones or the Snyder ones. I really like Batman in all forms. And the Matt Reeves one we've talked about on this channel, that is one of my all-time favorite live-action Batman movies. But the balance that we talked about between the darker, grittier side of Batman and the kind of the campier, pulpier aspect of it, it's always going to come down to a matter of personal taste, and particularly in live action, it can affect your buy-in. Like if you're like, I want this to be as realistic as possible, you're probably going to gravitate more towards the Nolan end of things. If you like a little bit more of that campy flavor, you're probably going to gravitate more towards Burton and that era. But they're both great. But what's so special about the Batman animated series and this movie in particular is with the animated series, it could do campy stories about the Joker trying to patent laughing fish, and it could do serious existential drama about Bruce Wayne wondering what his life might have been like if he had never become Batman while he's being psychologically tortured by the Mad Hatter. And it will do them both, and it will do them great because Batman, the animated series, blended those two tones flawlessly. And that's a hard thing to do, and it is one of the things that animation can do that sometimes live action can't, or it can, but you have to buy in a little bit more. And in particular, like the Batman animated series legacy has extended on beyond just the fact that it was one of the first animated series of its kind. It basically created the DC animated universe that has become beloved. It inspired sequel series. It inspired the Justice League series, the Superman series, the Batman Arkham series video games, which are some of my favorite Batman stories, and I've played those games religiously more times than I can count. The first two games in the series were written by Paul Dini, who is actually one of the writers and creators of the Batman animated series. And while they're not the same continuity, you play those games, you can see, oh, this is clearly taking direct canonical inspiration from this Batman animated series. And So its influence looms large, and in particular the cast as well, like and the history of the characters. You know, we'll get more into this, but like there are certain elements of the animated series that have become so beloved and so popular that they've now become comic book canon. The character of Harley Quinn, created in the Batman animated series. The iconic Mr. Freeze backstory about his tragedy related to his wife Nora, created by the Batman animated series in an Emmy-winning episode. But in particular, this movie of Batman Mask of the Phantasm, it fits seamlessly into the Batman animated series legacy, but it also kind of stands apart from it because it did get a theatrical release, and that kind of places it in a little bit of a separate tier because they could do more with it with a slightly bigger budget, even if they botched the release a little bit, because this was very late in the process when they decided this would be a theatrical release. But they still managed to, you know, take advantage of that. And in doing so, they created a movie that you do not need to have seen any episode of the Batman and the animated series to necessarily appreciate and love this movie. But if you have, it elevates the entire series to a level of just like epic emotional tragedy, because you get down to the idea that Bruce Wayne might have been willing to walk away from being Batman because of this one woman, this one character of Andrea Beaumont, who is introduced in this movie. And even though she has not really carried over into much of the comic book lore, and there's a reason for that, in a weird way, that allows her to stand out as a singular creation of this movie that just makes it feel extremely special. And I can't wait to talk more about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as somebody who I always say that I'm much more of a fan of comic book adaptations than I am of comic books. Even though I say that as I, over the past couple of years, have amassed a really nice collection of X-Men, Uncanny X-Men omnibuses that I'm actually making it a point to dive into them this year. Part of my goal to limit the amount of new new books that I buy is, hey, I've got this massive collection of X-Men comics that I can spend the next year reading. Um, but yeah, the amount of comics that I've actually read, throughout my life, is a small amount, and but I've always been a big fan of the properties themselves, and so for me, just knowing Batman from the films and the television series, Andrea Beaumont just looms so large as a part of the Batman mythos for me. Um, so that's a bit of a shame that like they haven't picked that up and run with it. But on the other hand, as you say, it's nice because it allows this movie to kind of stand on its own. And I believe like they also paid off the Phantasm storyline in an episode of one of the other shows. I think Batman Beyond, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the episodes did that, and so what just a great character, and and a fantastic performance by Dana Delaney. It's just they just did such a remarkable job. And it's a tall order to get, like kids, I was 11 years old at the time, or not even. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, this came out in 93, so I was only 9 years old when this came out, actually. And to get to a young kid to, like, sit there and be emotionally entangled in, you know, a love story. And yes, grown-up John would come to just adore love stories, but this is 9-year-old John who very much liked the stuff he watched to have his, you know, the action stuff and for things to keep moving. So you know, I think they did a remarkable job. I was thinking today as I was watching this, you know, it's brilliant the way this film is structured, and what I love is when you get your first like really big chunk of flashback. I think it's the second, maybe the second time we go into the past, and it really is just about forming that love story between Bruce and Andrea, and at some point you cut back to the present, but it's you've spent such a large chunk of time in the past following this love story, and then it, you know, goes back into the present time, and you're like, oh, that's right, we're following this story too. It just like you get distracted by how, you know, engrossing, you know, the other side of the story is, and you know, and that's why, like, we talked about the fact that this movie is only like what did we say, 77 minutes long or something like that, and but it just feels like such a big story, and the emotional, you know, side of it is not shortchanged, you know. You really feel the love story, and this is a movie that's got lots of other stuff going on too, so it has to make room for all these different plot elements, and nothing ever feels rushed or shortchanged.
Yeah.
I think that's that's just one hell of a feat to accomplish.
Oh, I agree. Like when we reviewed or discussed Oppenheimer, we talked about the fact that that was a 3-hour movie that felt like it just absolutely flew because we were loving it so much. This is almost a different, like the opposite of that, while still being great in the sense that while this movie is only 77 minutes, it feels like a 2.5, 3-hour epic, but not in the sense of like, oh, you're checking your watch, like, when is this going to be over? It just, when you get to the end of its nearly 80-minute runtime, you feel like you've just gotten 160 minutes worth of story, even though it, like, and part of the reason is that there's not a wasted second in this movie. And they can do that in part because even though they're handling two timelines, it's very intensely character focused. And all of the character and plot elements really serve the central story, which is the tragic love story of Bruce Wayne and Andrea Beaumont. You know, it's notable, for instance, just to, you know, say, there's no Robin in this movie. Robin is established at this point in the animated series canon, but I guess Dick Grayson's off at college. Jim Gordon shows up briefly, but he's only, you know, he basically serves the, you know, the plot. I'm gonna like Harvey Bullock, you know, all the other supporting characters. Alfred's always Alfred. Alfred's great, but the characters who really get to shine in this movie are Bruce and Andrea and the Joker, with Mark Hamill, and then there are a couple of good moments for some other characters like Arthur Reeves and Salvatore Valestra, but it really is a two-hander, and it's fitting because Bruce and Andrea not only being romantic partners in this movie, tragically so, but they are antagonists to one another for most of the movie. Okay, let's just get it out there because it's hard to talk about this movie without talking about the plot. Basically, the conceit of this movie is that Bruce Wayne is being blamed for a series of vigilante murders that are being committed by this new creature, shadow in Gotham called the Phantasm. And that's the story that plays out in the modern day. And the story of this movie is unfurling the mystery of why the Phantasm is targeting these mob bosses, and what, like, how it all ties back into the history of the Beaumont family, Andrea and her father Carl, and what it was that caused Bruce Wayne and Andrea Beaumont to separate. And we come to learn, as we'll just say, that, well, they try to mislead us by making us believe that the Phantasm is Andrea's father, Carl Beaumont. It turns out to be Andrea herself. And the fact that she is tortured by effectively the same moral dilemma that Bruce Wayne is, not only torn between her love for Bruce, as Bruce is by his love for Andrea, but by her desire for justice. But the thematic conflict comes into the idea that while they both end up taking on masked personalities to get that justice, Andrea's justice becomes corrupted by vengeance, which is the one thing that Batman has been striving to avoid for his entire career, namely in the form of his sacred rule of his do not kill rule. The Phantasm kills. The Phantasm's purpose is to execute the people who betrayed her family and betrayed her and cost her the life that she wanted with Bruce. And that makes her not only a tragic figure, but it serves as a brilliant psychological and thematic inversion of the Batman character. And it's not a coincidence that the Phantasm, as you can see in this picture here, looks very much like Batman. It is, that serves a plot point because, of course, the police and most of the citizens of Gotham think it is Batman committing these murders. But they're, the plot serves the theme here. And the theme is that Batman and the Phantasm are shadowy reflections of one another. And in so many ways, that just makes this movie so incredibly rich.
Yeah. Side note about the police thinking that Batman is, that the Phantasm is Batman. There's one, police lieutenant who's all too eager to be happy to jump to that conclusion, and that is a good old Harvey Bullock. And I love that. I'm sorry, because the series always took great pleasure in really kind of making fun of Bullock. I love that he finally gets taken off the leash, and what's his first ingenious idea to trap Batman? Let's try the signal. It's because it's not like Batman's smart enough to figure that one out.
Yeah,
I love it.
The character of Harvey Bullock, I will say, he's a character who we really haven't gotten as many adaptations of in the live action movies. Actually, the only one I can really think of is he's in the Gotham show where he's played by Donald Logue. But part of it is just the fact that the animated version of Harvey Bullock is such a distinctive and specific character, as voiced by Robert Costanzo, that I'm just that's Harvey Bullock. And if you can't do this version of Harvey Bullock, why even bother? But yeah, he's great, and he provides some wonderful color throughout this movie. Even though he is ultimately, one of the things that I always find fascinating about him as a character is, even though he doesn't like Batman, and that's a recurring theme throughout the animated series, he is ultimately still a good cop in the sense that he's not corrupt. He is one of the ones who is trying to do it right, even though he's kind of a little bit of a clumsy oaf about it at times.
Yeah. It's one of those things that I didn't think of when I was a kid, because he was just he was an obstacle to Batman, because he's always trying to, he doesn't like Batman, and in this he's trying to catch him because he's given an excuse to go after him. But it's one of those things how, it can kind of go over your head, but he is for the most part, this movie accepted because he's let off the leash by someone higher up, but he's for the most part, loyal to Gordon,
Mhm.
and he is a cop, like, just who's actually trying to do good
Yeah.
things. It's again, like, his one big flaw is that he really doesn't like Batman. But yeah. But also, like, and then I think about the fact that this is also a kid's show, so you still want to paint, your police force as, trying to do good, even the more despicable ones. So, like, there was only so far they were gonna go with, like, painting the picture of a quote unquote bad cop, Um, but yeah, no, and he doesn't get a whole lot to do in this movie, but it is just nice to see him because he is such a distinctive
Yeah.
character from the animated series. And you're right, like, this version of Bullock is so distinctive that every time I've seen him in something else, like in another version, I'm always like, that's not Bullock.
Uh,
But yeah, it's one of the hazards of growing up on this show and having, like, so many things become so iconic specifically to this version. um and same thing with, like, Mr. Freeze.
yeah.
Even though the character certainly existed in other media before this, it was not in this way and not this version of the character. And that unfortunately set me up for some expectations that were not met when Batman and Robin came around,
Yeah.
which were not exclusive to Mr. Freeze, but I feel like, and to their credit, they actually tried to tackle, the story that came about from from the animated series, but they also were wanting to mix it with the silliness of the character from the '60s show, and on top of that, cast Arnold Schwarzenegger. Uh, it's like, what? I remember my fan cast at the time was, Patrick Stewart as Mr. Freeze, and oh, if only, but
Well,
would have had to be a very different movie.
yeah. He had to they had to save him for the other comic book Marvel verse over in with the X-Men, which I think was probably the right call. But yeah, in terms of to tie it into the idea of like Batman villains, Batman has one of the most iconic rogues galleries of any comic book villain. Some people vouch for Spider-Man, or their Superman obviously has a few iconic villains. The X-Men, do as well. But as a collective whole, Batman's rogues gallery is unmatched because you can just say their names and you know immediately that they're Batman villains and what how important they are. The Joker, the Penguin, the Riddler, Two-Face, Poison Ivy, Mr. Freeze, who those are two villains who I desperately would like to see get another live action interpretation because I love them so much as villains. And as much as great as, as campy fun as they can be, like, they really are deserve a more serious interpretation than what Batman and Robin gave them. But they're great. Same with Bane, same with Harley Quinn. But part of the idea with Batman having such a well established rogues gallery is the fact that because all of these villains have been around since like the 40s or 50s or 60s, and it can be hard to create a new Batman villain that just feels as indelible because they're competing against 80 years worth of history, and you're like, well, why not just use one of the old reliables? And like, it can be done. Bane is a relatively recent creation. Ra's al Ghul has become more elevated in recent years. And sometimes a character crossing over into the movies is what gives them that extra boost. But the reason that I bring all that up is because the Phantasm, Andrea Beaumont, is an original creation for this movie. And not only is Andrea Bruce Wayne's love interest, and it's hard to create a new love interest for a character, she's also an antagonist in this movie, in at least to Batman, and it's incredibly hard to create a compelling new Batman antagonist. And this movie does them both in one character and makes her so indelible that's why I think it's kind of tragic that she hasn't become such a staple of the Batman storytelling going forward. But again, it makes her feel special because she is so unique and so very much important to this moment in time in Bruce Wayne's life. Because while this movie depicts the Batman origin story, it doesn't depict we don't see Bruce Wayne's parents die. They're alluded to, but it we know what happened there. We also don't see Bruce, getting his training. It's alluded to the fact that he's mastered various martial arts and has been building up his entire life for this moment. But unlike, say, Batman Begins, where we got perhaps the most iconic and definitive version of what it would actually be like to train to become Batman, we don't see that in this movie necessarily. What we see, an essential part of his origin story, but one that really isn't often covered, is the moment of doubt. The moment of doubt where he tries to reckon with the fact, I have been training and committed to do this my entire life, to fulfill this promise to my parents, to fill this hole in my heart that may never be able to be filled. And I'm all ready to do it. And then this woman comes into his life. Andrea comes into his life. And as it is repeated several times throughout this movie, she was not part of the plan. And part of what makes it so tragic and so beautiful is that she begins to heal Bruce's heart in that way, to the point that he is willing to consider setting aside his crusade to become Batman for her. And he almost gets there. And then they're torn apart. And that sends him further down the path to becoming Batman. It's the moment that makes him in the animated canon. It is the moment that he chooses once and forever to become Batman. And it is given all the iconic weight of all those separate scenes that we'll talk about in detail. But after Andrea breaks his heart by leaving, and we get the scene where he's in the cave and Alfred hands him the mask and he puts the mask on, and Alfred gasps in shock and awe and horror. It feels monumental. And it would have been monumental just because of the iconography of Bruce Wayne donning the Batman mask for the first time, but it feels all the more so because it's laden with the tragedy and the heartbreak of this moment could have been averted if Andrea had been able to stay, but because she didn't, now Bruce has chosen his destiny, and now he will always be Batman. And even when they're reunited, and even as desperately as they want to mend that bridge between them, this was the moment when their fates were set. And it just feels heartbreakingly beautiful and tragic and sad.
And this is why, I'm going to admit that you and I, have because we had different entry points into Batman. So I think we and I want to make this crystal clear. I adore the Christopher Nolan films. Mm-hmm. But that said, my love of Batman is always going to be tied more in with the mythic version of Batman, the gothic, the really gothic version. So because I grew up with the Tim Burton films, and so rather than this utilitarian version of Batman, selecting what his armor is going to be, and like, you know, and the Batman Begins version of, um, this is why I'm deciding on the image of, a bat and the all that stuff. This for me, like, will always be like the moment that Bruce Wayne becomes Batman, because it's so steeped in, like gothic tragedy, and and this feeling of this man who could have walked away from this darkness within him, um, but unfortunately his destiny has now been set, and then mix that in with the surroundings of the Batcave, which is suitably gothic, and Shirley Walker's amazing musical score, which takes like inspiration from Danny Elfman, but in this film especially, like, just becomes its own beautiful thing, and it's funny because the animated series starts off with the Danny Elfman theme from the films, but she developed a theme for Batman along the way, and that's used as the main theme for this film. And so, and then to just hear that theme with the choir backing, as he makes this decision and puts on the mask, and that shocked reaction from Alfred, everything about it is just so heightened, and so it feels like the mythical birth of, this great tragic, figure who's also, a creature of the night, and so that is always going to be like the version of Batman that like calls to me, and that's why uh, this version of the birth of Batman is like the most iconic, and always what I think of when I think of, Bruce Wayne becoming Batman. And I just remember when I was a kid, it sent chills down my spine, and now, and still it does.
Mhm.
Um, I don't even have to watch the scene. I turn on the soundtrack, listen to the soundtrack of the scene. I'm like, oh god. And what I love, this is a little soundtrack nerdery coming, but I love that for the like quote unquote like uh Batman theme track
Mhm.
on the soundtrack. It's basically the opening titles, which are gloriously majestic, and then this track, like it segs into this track, and to make this one like wonderful wonderful cue that is Shirley Walker's Batman theme for the film, and it is like one of my favorite pieces of music ever composed, and especially for Batman films. And it's, I mentioned the connection to Danny Elfman, and of course she worked with Danny Elfman, on his team for. Um, I don't remember if it was both Batman films. I think definitely the first Batman. And I'm not sure about Batman Returns, but but yeah. So there's that connection that it very much feels like an extension of what Danny Elfman did, but then it also like becomes its own wonderful thing. And and we've been blessed that actually La La Land Records has released like 4 glorious albums of music from the animated series. And yes, I own them all. And and it's just a beautiful tapestry of music that she wrote for the entire series, and which was performed with a live orchestra, and you just don't get that normally for an animated series for targeted at kids in the 90s. Like, that was not something that was
Mhm.
typical, and so she had her opportunity to really shine in this film, and man, she took it. And the music for that scene in particular is just off the charts amazing.
Yeah, Batman has been blessed to have so many iconic composers composed so many iconic pieces of music for him. And from Hans Zimmer to Danny Elfman to Michael Giacchino with the Matt Reeves Batman movie. Shirley Walker is not a name that you automatically think of in that company, but the moment that you hear that musical notes, you're just like, that's it. That's the theme right there. And when you think back to like the episodes of the animated Batman the Animated Series, every single episode starts with the opening montage of the criminals racing through Gotham and trying to get away from the police, and then they encounter Batman and he defeats them, and then they're tied up, and it pans up to Batman standing on that on the tall building looking fearsome and proud, and then the lightning strikes behind him and you're just like, let's fucking go. Even when I was like 5-6 years old watching this, I was like, let's fucking go.
Well, what's interesting about that is that because for that they do use the Danny Elfman theme, but what's interesting is the Danny Elfman theme is really only used like once or twice in the actual show, and that's early on in the run. I think in one of the early episodes it's prominently used, in one of them. I think it's one of the episodes with the Scarecrow, actually. But then elsewhere throughout the series, if you're hearing a theme for Batman, it's Shirley Walker's music. And I think it's kind of easy to go unnoticed because she so seamlessly like bridged from what Elfman had done into her own material. But when you hear her theme, it's so distinctive and so iconic on its own. It's actually one of my one of the sadnesses about the fact that I think she did such a great job and was with the exception of people who are like very immersed in the music of the series or the series itself or film music in general, like I don't think like you get a recognition of how integral a role she played, in not just the animated series, but sort of what Batman is musically. And I even wish that her theme would have had like a life beyond the series itself. And like, because we think of what Danny Elfman did of like, and that theme has made some appearances, outside of the those films, and I really wish that her music would do it as well, because I just think that for me it would be on the same level of what's happening now with like the X-Men music, that's playing such a big role in what Marvel is doing with the X-Men. I think that it would have a similar effect for people who grew up on this show. But it's just, it's what she did with, bringing life to the character, and like all the characters, we're talking just about the Batman theme, but also another theme present in this film is the music for the Joker, which is also incredibly iconic, and it's like whimsical, but it has like an edge to it. And I don't even get, like, we'll talk about it when we get to talk about the end of the film, but when the explosions start going off and we get Joker's maniacal laughter and the epic music in the background of that, oh my God, it just like it was a home run with this film.
And her theme for Andrea as well. That is one of my favorite pieces of music. The love theme that she shares with Bruce, and how it is like tragically echoed in the Phantasm's theme. But in particular, I mentioned the opening scene of the animated series. to talk about the fact that like this movie doesn't open with that exact, sequence, but it does something similar. And from the moment that you get the Warner Brothers logo and then it comes into the movie and they do this like sweeping tracking shot through the buildings of Gotham, and Shirley Walker's like her theme for this movie is playing it throughout it, you're just like, it gives you that same vibe of just like, let's do this. This is Batman, and we are about to see something truly epic, and then the movie lives up to that promise because, her score, it really, I talked when we did Dune about music being like sense memory. That is what this score does. It teaches you what's going on in the movie, even if you were to like if you happen not to be watching it, if you're just listening to the score, you can hear the story playing out in this music. And it's so hitched to emotion and to character that it sings as it accompanies this movie. It is so perfect for this tone and this world. And that's true for all the characters, but my favorite theme in the movie is Andrea's theme, because it just is so specific to her, and it's part of what helps us fall in love with her as a character alongside Bruce, because as I mentioned, it's kind of difficult to introduce a new love interest into this movie, like especially for Batman, because unlike Lois Lane with for Superman, or Mary Jane Watson for Peter Parker, Bruce Wayne has a couple of different love interests throughout the comics. Probably his most enduring one is Selena Kyle, or Catwoman. Talia al Ghul is also there, Vicky Vale. But Andrea is a new love interest. Rachel Dawes from the Batman movies, although, she obviously doesn't last very long. But this is Andrea, like, from the moment she enters the story, we're very intrigued by her. And part of that is the music, the way it kind of like gives us this kind of curious vibe as we meet her standing by her parents' grave, kind of just happily talking to her deceased mother while Bruce is over there brooding by his parents' grave. But then she's just so like joyful and chipper and witty, and from the like we just want to see more of her. And by the time she comes back to Bruce's manor and she's teasing him, she's like, "What, you didn't call after 3 days? What's wrong with you?"
You must be dead or something.
Yeah, you must be dead or something. And then Bruce is like, "I'm practicing jujitsu," and she's like, "Gesundheit." And he's like, "That was a joke," and he's like, "Jujitsu is not a joke." And then she just takes the piss out of him, and that could be annoying in the hands of a different character, but you just sense that she is up to the task, and she just works her way into Bruce's heart almost immediately, which is where you get like when they have their little tumble on the grass, and then it turns into a makeout session, and Alfred comes out with a lemon, and he's like, "Oh my!" And but then he smiles and turns back into the house, and like that's an element of the story that, like, when I was watching it, as a 7 or 8 year old, I was just like, "Oh, they're kissing. Go back to the fighting." Now I'm just like, it's so beautiful and so romantic, and it continues on throughout the movie. Like, the characters are just so well matched.
No, it was funny, and I had a stray thought while I was watching it. I was like, if this is anything other than a 77-minute movie aimed at kids, I would have said, "Damn, they're moving pretty fast." But that's the beauty of the animated form, and we can, and also because, again, talking about the music, we get swept up in the love story. So and I love that Alfred moment is repeated in the movie, which lowers your guard because you think, oh, things are going to be okay now, and it's like, oh no.
Yeah, no, Alfred is Bruce and Andrea's biggest cheerleader throughout this movie. Like, he's very restrained and, British reserved because he's Alfred, but he wants these two crazy kids to work it out. He like is very much encouraging Bruce to explore the possibilities that come with Andrea having come into his life and the possibility of, you know, them finding happiness together. Um, and he, Bruce is the one who is trying to work through that uncertainty because, as he tells Andrea during their very first meeting, I made a vow. I made a vow to my parents' memory. And she asks, have you kept that vow? And he replies, I have so far. And she tests that vow, even if she doesn't realize how much she's testing it right at the beginning, because for him, it's not just about the idea that, like, oh, she wasn't part of the plan, as she says. It's the fact that Bruce sees her and he realizes, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to become Batman, I can't have somebody at home waiting for me, wondering if I am going to come home. And that's crystallized in that scene that you just pulled up here, where when they're out on their date at the World Fair and he sees the motorcycle thugs trying to steal from the poor street vendor, and he, without any of his Batman armor, leaps to the guy's defense, and he handles himself extremely well, takes out multiple, you know, adversaries until the moment that he just catches the briefest glimpse of Andrea out of the corner of his eye, and that distracts him just long enough to take a beating and for the villains to get away. And that is when he starts to really double down on the idea, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can have both. And so he's torn with that choice. And that is the moment when he tries to start pushing Andrea away, but now he's miserable because he loves her. And then he goes to his parents' grave. And that is when we get one of, we will talk about this scene in detail because it is one of my favorite Batman scenes ever, even though it's just Bruce and he's just talking to his, you know, his parents' memory until Andrea arrives. But the writing and the performances in this scene are so beautiful. Kevin Conroy and himself has talked about this was one of his favorite scenes he ever recorded as Batman or as Bruce Wayne. And you can just see why, because everything about this scene is perfect.
Yeah, I'm actually looking to see if I can pull up the actual dialogue because it's just.
I have it if you need it, but just let me know.
Just looking. Yeah, I don't think I have it on this page.
All right.
But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so just setting the scene, you know, after this encounter with the bad guys who escape, and Bruce is trying kind of like separating himself from Andrea because he's trying to figure out if he should, you know, try to pursue this life with her or not. He goes to his parents' grave, which he's done before throughout this movie. And of course, it's dark and lightning and raining and classic like Batman weather, but it's just Bruce. And he goes to his parents' grave, he kneels down, and he says, you know, he's talking to them, and it's kind of like in media res because he's like trying to justify himself to them. And as we cut into it, he says, quote, it doesn't mean I don't care anymore. I don't want to let you down, honest, but it just doesn't hurt so bad. Which, so beautiful. But you can understand that, can't you? Look, I can give money to the city. They can hire more cops. Let someone else take the risk. It's different now. And then crashing thunder and lightning, Bruce starts pleading more. He says, please, I need it to be different now. I know I made a promise, but I didn't see this coming. I didn't count on being happy. And as your heart is just shattering into a million pieces, he starts crying. He's like, please tell me that it's okay. And then you hear from off screen Andrea's voice, and she says, maybe they already have, maybe they sent me. So perfect. And of course, they run to each other and they hug in the rain. And when I talked about the moment of doubt for Bruce, this was it, because this is effectively the universe, his parent spirit, pure chance, giving him permission to walk away from his destiny of being Batman, and to feel justified in doing so, because he doesn't owe this to his parents in the way he thinks he does. He's doing this because the loss of his parents understandably tore him a hole in his heart that he's trying to fill. And he ultimately is going to find meaning and purpose in his quest to being Batman, to protect the citizens of Gotham and make sure no one else has to suffer the way he suffered. But it doesn't necessarily have to be him. That was not a destiny that he was always fated to take on. He chose to do so. And if he had taken this moment to pursue another path, to fall in love, to raise a family, to perhaps try to give back to the city in another way, he could have theoretically done so. One of my favorite episodes of the animated series, perhaps my favorite episode of the animated series, is the episode Perchance to Dream, where Bruce effectively, it ends up being revealed as a plot by the Mad Hatter, but basically Bruce wakes up and finds himself in a life where his parents never died. He's engaged to Selena Kyle. He's happy, and he just and Batman is somebody else. And he spends the episode pushing against that, because he's just like, this is wrong. I know this isn't my life. I know that these experiences happen to me, and I need to figure this out. And ultimately he does, and he exposes the Mad Hatter's plot. But it's a tragedy at the end, because when he walks away, he realizes that he had given up something there, that even though it was a lie, there was a potential life for him that he has chosen to walk away from. And we see an echo of that life in this episode, because he has a chance here to be truly happy with Andrea. And the big tragedy is that he makes that choice. When she comes to him at the grave, that's the moment that he actually chooses he is not going to be Batman. He is going to propose to Andrea, give up this ghost, and live a happy life with her. And part of the tragedy is that it's her backstory, or rather the circumstances surrounding her family, that exert an influence that cause her to break away from him, even though she loves him as well. And it's that heartbreak that makes him realize that he turns back to being Batman. But in this case, he does so because he committed to that life with Andrea, and then she returns the engagement ring that he gave her and says, I can't do this. And so he becomes Batman in a moment of despair. And it's just heart-shattering in that way, because you could see the potential there. And
it's
because of
and it's so heartbreaking, because then it's a choice that's almost like it almost robs him of that choice of this is a story in which he becomes Batman, because then he's left in a moment of despair where he has nothing left but his quest for vengeance, after he's already made the choice to walk away from that. And it's just so heartbreaking. And one of the things that I love most about the scene at the grave is the fact that at that point in the story, Andrea still does not know what he promised his parents,
Yeah.
and she does not ask to know at that point. She just hears him pleading for them to, tell him that it's okay, to walk away from that promise, and she's there to say maybe they already have, and she asks nothing of him except just to, you know, to allow her to help him, and and there's just something so beautiful about that, of saying, I know this thing is weighing heavy on your heart. Let it go. I don't need to know what it is, but let me help you let go of it. And it just, it's so, it's so heart wrenching, and it's so beautiful. And yeah, this is just one of the most beautifully done love stories, out of any medium. And it's just, yeah, and then it's just, made so tragic by the fact that then she succumbs to the thing, which he's been trying to walk at, as Alfred says, like he walks it, on like a razor's edge,
Mhm.
you know, um, every night, that he goes out. But unfortunately, she, she wasn't able to, she decides to go all in on vengeance.
Yeah.
And and it's so, and it's so sad, compounded by the fact that if you look at their first scene, it's a stark contrast of, as you mentioned, she's happily talking to her mother at the grave. He's brooding at the graveside of his parents because he's made this pledge to avenge their deaths. And so you look at that and you're like, one of them has a healthy disposition towards the loss that they've suffered, and one doesn't. And then you look at where the story ends up, where um, where she has succumbed to seeking out vengeance, not just for the death of her father, but for the life that was taken from her.
Yeah.
And her care, like, and again, talking about, this is a film extension of a 90s animated series that very much appeals to adults, but was targeted to kids. And it ends with this character, you know, answering to the question of, do you want to be alone with I am? And it's just, it's so heartbreaking just to see, her character arc, and where, you know, and where she goes, throughout the film. And
Yeah. And it's doubly tragic because we've talked a lot about how shattering it is for Bruce to lose Andrea and how it effectively leads directly to his choice to become Batman. Part of the reason this is so incredibly impactful is it's a two-sided tragedy. It is equally shattering for Andrea to lose Bruce. And it's, the movie doesn't get into that right away because we are primarily grounded in Bruce's perspective. And, when she returns the ring off screen and leaves with her father, we don't get the full story immediately. But eventually we do. And we learn that it was not her choice to walk away either. It was a choice that was imposed upon her by her because her father got into some shady dealings with some monsters. And he basically was like, we need to leave now or they're going to kill us both. And she's like, I can't. I just agreed to marry Bruce. We have a life here. And he's like, listen to me. Like, if you don't do this, you won't have a future. And so she flees with him. And then she loses everything, because she eventually loses her father. The mobsters catch up to him. She loses Bruce. And what is she left with? She's left with a desire for vengeance, and not a righteous desire to make Gotham better, just a desire to hurt the people who took everything she loved away from her, including Bruce. And we see that, when they have their interactions later, when they reunite and they're much, colder towards one another, it's an act on her part. She's devastated. She's still in love with Bruce. And when she tells him, that, the only one being controlled by his parents here is you, that's an obvious lie. And we see it immediately, because as soon as he leaves, she drops the facade, she breaks down, she falls onto her bed, and she just sobs, because this is what she has, and she can't move on until she gets retribution for what was taken from her. And eventually we open the door to that possibility later in the movie, but unlike Bruce, she proves unable or unwilling to let this go. And that's why at the end, when she says, when the guy asks her, do you want to be alone? And she says, I am. That's why. It's because Bruce had a line that he would not cross, and Andrea blew right by that line, and it cost her everything.
Yeah. Oh. Speaking of lines, blowing right past, let's take a pause right now, because we didn't stop for the mid-roll. Which we are going to take a second to talk about something else real quick, because I have to get some thoughts off my chest. But first, let's talk about what's coming up next week. Next week is my birthday, so we're going to have a bit of fun next week, and we'll be talking about the film Goldeneye, and also the video game. Probably a bit of James Bond in general, and also just having fun, for my birthday, and just goofing around a bit. And yeah, so that'll be fun. And then the week after that, we're doing the Bad Batch after that, right?
Yeah, I mean, we hadn't definitively settled on the date, but I think it's probably going to be a good time, because that'll be after the next big two-parter. And it won't be the exact mid-season point, but it will be gearing up for the home stretch at this point, and I have a feeling some important stuff is going to go down in these next few episodes, so it'll be a good time to check in. And I'm very much looking forward to that. I've been loving that show. I'm looking forward to revisiting Goldeneye as well, because it has been a couple years since I saw that movie, but it's just so much fun. And
I watched the trailer when I was posting the description for this week's episode, and I was like, oh man, I can't wait to rewatch this. It's just, it was my first James Bond movie, and as such, it's just always gonna have a real special place in my heart, and I love it so much, because I remember like going into that movie and watching the first scene and sort of rolling my eyes, like, how can this guy do all this stuff? And my mom just saying, he's James Bond. And then, of course, the funniest part of that story is the fact that by like, after like a third of the way through the movie, both my mom and dad had fallen asleep on the couch, and I was laying on the floor like this, just completely engrossed in the movie. So it just shows that, it's a different Bond for a different generation. And yeah, it's so we're gonna have a lot of fun talking about that. And it's interesting. I think we're timing it good with our discussion on the Bad Batch, because the actual midpoint of the season would have been this week, but But I was kind of distracted a bit by another animated show that dropped on Disney Plus this week, and I don't think I would have been like. Uh, I definitely want to be able to devote all my attention to the Bad Batch when we do do our second stream. But this week did see the release of the first two episodes of X-Men '97, and oh, Jared, it's so good. It's like it just hitting all the right nostalgia buttons, but also you can see where it's going to chart its own path. It has like the filmmaking behind it has a sense of like maturity that it feels like a show that it both feels like a natural extension of the original series, but also it feels like um, it's grown up also with the audience. So it's it has like there's moments, especially in the second episode, of like real emotional gravitas that just broke my heart. And it's so amazing, and all the voice actors are great. Both the returning cast members and also the new voice actors they brought in. And and I'm just gonna say, like the opening title sequence, it's like just a loving recreation of the original X-Men intro, uh, like amped up and with a couple new you know, characters thrown into the mix, and it just feels like X-Men the animated series if it was made in 2024, and then that's just a beautiful thing. And yeah, I'm I cannot wait for next week. I'm just so excited because and something else that has me really excited about it is just the prospect of a whole new generation of X-Men fans, like it, coming about because of the show, and the fact that in years to come, that generation will be saying that this was the show that introduced them to the X-Men, and and it just feels like just this wonderful generational thing that and it makes me so happy that this is how you know Marvel has chosen to really introduce the X-Men in this new era.
Yep.
And the only thing that pissed me off was I read one article that said this is a nice uh, you know taste of things to come for X-Men fans, like a tease. I'm like, no, this is not a tease for freaking live action, whatever. This is the main course. Like, just enjoy this for its own sake and stop being so obsessed with what they're going to do a couple of years down the road with the live action stuff. So yeah, I just it's so great. Yeah. So as soon as you're ready to dive into it, it will be worth the wait because it's just so absolutely amazing.
Yeah, no, I had a feeling that you were gonna be happy with the show, and I'm so glad to hear that you are so loving it so much. It seems to have gone over extremely well with all fans of the original X-Men animated series, which I have not seen the two new episodes of '97 yet, and the only reason for that was that unlike Batman the Animated Series, where I periodically go back and rewatch, favorite episodes, so it's all pretty fresh for me. It has been years, many, many, many years since I saw the original X-Men animated show, which I did really love at one time, but I was like, before I delve back in, I want to at least go revisit a few select episodes of that show, and then I didn't have time to this week. But the response, particularly from you and other people I trust, was so overwhelming that I was like, I don't know, I might just have to watch it and then catch up later. But the reason I didn't was I ended up being distracted by another show that came out this week that I am loving very much, which is Netflix's Three Body Problem. But we will get into that later. I am very happy with that show and where it's going, but I am looking forward to delving into X-Men '97 very soon. And whenever you want to talk about it on this channel, you know, I didn't know if you wanted to wait for like the full season or whatever, but if you ever want to make it a priority, I'll catch up.
If we didn't already have so much like scheduled out, I probably would have been like, screw it, let's just talk about this. But no, we'll wait for the right time. I will say that I think that it does a really great job of like introducing like new viewers to it. There's obviously it plays off of where the series finale of X-Men the animated series left off, and there are definite allusions to things that happen throughout the animated series. But I think for the most part, it's a really good introductory episode for like a new era of the series, and I do think there will be new viewers that come into it with this episode, and I think if anything, it'll like, I don't think it'll be like, oh, I don't understand what's going on, and more like, well, now I want to go see what happened, you know, before. I want to go back and watch the original series, which is why, like, I keep making it over the past couple of years. I've kept making occasional tweets, and I'm sure it's falling on deaf ears, but God damn it, Disney really needs to remaster the original series, especially now. When people will be going back to watch it because of this. It's, you know, it's overdue, and that's a series that would really benefit from, you know, being upgraded to HD. So I hope they get around to it one of these days. But in the meantime, we've got this glorious show that looks phenomenal in 4K, and yeah, it's. It was just like, you know, I was reduced to a little, you know, kid again, just watching this. Like, I can't believe it's 2024 and I'm watching new episodes of X-Men. So yeah, and it unfortunately, the one unfortunate thing is it got me to venture back onto Twitter a bit more than I have been recently, because I just wanted to post about like how excited I was about it, and then I spent a little too long on there. I was like, oh no, this is why I don't do this anymore.
Don't do it.
Yeah,
I'm there, and I'm telling you not to do it. But yeah, I'm so happy to hear that, because I know how important the X-Men are to you, and in particular this show, and how much you're looking forward to it. And sometimes expectations can, you know, color these things, but it sounds like the show is just blown right through all that, and you're just back where you want to be. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to catching up at some point, and trying to as we continue our renaissance of beloved '90s animated content. You know, let us celebrate it in all forms, and you know, and we got great Star Wars animation on there too. Like, just give it all to us. It's great.
yeah, and I will say, like, the best thing about it for me is the fact that you know, everybody knows my history with, you know, all the Marvel Studios stuff, and
No, I've never heard this from you ever.
And there have been a couple things here and there that I have genuinely like loved. You know, I think of, you know, Spider-Man No Way Home, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. But even with that stuff, when it's sort of like, you know, as much as I loved both of those things, it's almost like there's still an element of it that's like irony. Like, it's like, oh, can you believe I love this so much? Because it's Marvel Studios. And with this project, though, there's zero of that because I've just been so enthusiastic about it from the day it was announced. And my love of the, the original series is so pure, and I'm just so delighted that for me, it feels like I'm getting the pure excitement and joy from this that I've heard so many other people get from other Marvel Studios projects. But that I've always, either been at arm's length from it, or there's been, again, that irony to, oh, I can't believe I love this so much. This really appealed to me. This is just like, I'm just so in it and so overjoyed with what it's brought. And I will say, even though I don't like the whole, well, how is this going to inform what they do in live action? Because that's missing the point of how great this show is on its own. But that said, I will say that if what they achieve in their live action version of X-Men is like, if it's half as good as this, it's going to be out of this world amazing, because they've done such a phenomenal job with this series. And yeah, it's just, I could keep going on and repeating myself, but it's just such an out of this world amazing series, and I hope everybody's watching it because it's so good. All right, and with that, I will stop, and we can get back to to our main topic. But I had to devote some time to gushing about X-Men '97. Just had to.
I figured you would. I was fully prepared to just sit back and let the love flow from you about that subject. So we'll revisit it again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, just one more thing I will say. Like, obviously, all the voice actors are just amazing, but just the pure, unadulterated joy I got from hearing Cal Dodd's voice as Wolverine, it just it can't be understated, because oh my God, and I love Hugh Jackman. I've always loved Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, but there's just something primal about hearing Cal Dodd's voice as Wolverine that brings me back to my childhood. And it's like, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, it's a version of Wolverine that is very near and dear to my heart. I love his performances. I always have, but instinctively, that's Wolverine. so yeah. Yeah, looking forward to gushing about that a lot more at some point in the future. And yeah, and we'll definitely have a blast when we do that. But let's get back to Batman Mask of the Phantasm, and let's, speaking of iconic voices, let's just spend some time talking about this guy.
Yes.
Clown
Prince himself.
This also was a time when I saw this in theaters. This was 1993. This was not the age of, like pre-release hype and interviews, and I don't even think I necessarily saw a trailer for this, because I think the trailer actually did reveal that the Joker's in the movie. But I distinctly had a memory of like watching this movie, and in the scene where Salvatore Valestra is, going into the park, and is like, if only there was some other way. And I remember getting like the hair standing up on the back of my neck. I'm like, is the Joker going to be in this? The Joker has to be in this, right? It's they can't not have the Joker in this. And I just started getting this feeling that he was about to enter the scene. And it's such an iconic entrance. Just with that That stupid, welcome to the future song. And then the gunfire goes off. And then you just hear his voice as he says, I hate that song. He walks out of the shadows. And then Shirley Walker's music, announcing his entrance, kicks in. It's such, it's one of Joker's best entrances ever.
Yeah.
And Mark Hamill just he always knocks out of the park as the Joker, but he was so great in this, and there's so many great one-liners in this movie. Just this movie, and it was great before he shows up, but then as soon as he shows up, it takes off into the stratosphere.
Yeah, and he is Mark Hamill is perfect as the Joker. Obviously he is probably most well known and beloved for portraying Luke Skywalker, ultimate Jedi hero. That's near and dear to my heart. But it is a testament to how phenomenal he is as the Joker that I consider his portrayal of that character to be every bit as iconic, because there have obviously been many beloved interpretations of the Joker throughout the years, from Cesar Romero to Jack Nicholson to Heath Ledger to Joaquin Phoenix, Jared Leto as well. Maybe not quite on the level of the others. But I would say that Mark Hamill stands apart, because when I think of the iconic Joker laugh and voice, he is the one I think of. And part of it is just the fact that he eats up every single word and line of dialogue with an absolute delicious glee that none of the other Jokers quite portray, because in the live action, they do portray it a little bit more down to earth. Even when Jack Nicholson is hamming it up in the, and throwing paint on the artist galleries in Batman, it's still sometimes a little bit more restrained than what Mark Hamill will do in the animated series in this movie. When it is notable when they drive into the Gotham World Fair that's now rusted out and the future is in ruins. And Gotham, the T is now missing from the archway, and it says, "Go ham, State Fair." And that is what Mark Hamill does from the moment that he arrives. In particular, when I try to think about what key to get into for Mark Hamill's Joker voice, the line that always comes to mind for me, I'm not going to be able to do it, but it's just the way he does the inflection when he steps out of the tunnel looking all malevolent, and he says, "Can it be? Old Sally the Weezer Valestra. Welcome, Paisan. It's been a dog's age." And you're just but he does it in such a malevolent way that you're like, this guy, he's dangerous, even though he is clearly just having the time of his life. And one of the things about this movie is that even though the Joker gets to be all goofy and hammy and make all of his wisecracking jokes, this version of the Joker in this movie is also one of the most terrifying versions of the Joker that we get, particularly related to the animated series, because the animated series still had to conform to standards and practices a little bit. They didn't quite get as much on the violence.
Yeah, and
if you notice, does not have those restraints.
Well, if you notice, not the first episode in production order, but the first episode that aired for the Joker, which feels like it was, even though it wasn't the first in production order, it still always feels to me like that was how we were supposed to be introduced to the Joker in animated form. So that's why I'm a bit of a geek about this. When I'm watching Batman the Animated Series, I actually tend to still watch in the original air date order, because even though it's not technically correct to what they were working on, I still think like the character introductions are spot on with how they aired them on TV. Because with that first episode for the Joker, he comes on and he's portraying this poor guy who just, uh, beeps his horn at him in traffic, and like he chases him down, and he's so malevolent.
Yeah.
At first, and it's the one episode where they got really dark with his character and made him very menacing, and then they were told by the network, it's like, no, you've got to lighten up a bit. And this movie feels like a return to that original concept of the Joker, where he's super funny, but also he can flip on a dime, where he's scary as hell. Well, like one of my favorite moments is just when, Salvatore Valestra is, like grabs him by the collar. He's like, you're just as dirty as me, dirtier. And then he gets this horrible, angry expression on his face, and he goes, "Don't touch me, old man. I don't know where you've been." And it's just so brilliant. It's like he is without a doubt like my favorite version of the Joker. Like, all respect to everybody else who's ever played, and there's been wildly different interpretations, and obviously Heath Ledger's version is just so absolutely incredible. But very much like with Batman, when I think of the Joker, I tend to go to this version of the character, and just because he so gets that. We've been talking a lot about delicate balances, when you're telling this story, and I think like Mark Hamill got that about the Joker. Of, you've got this twisted individual who, is extremely dangerous, but also, just absolutely hysterical and wants to be like the goofiest person on the planet.
Yeah, and his Joker encompasses it all. Like across the animated series, you mentioned that episode, I believe it was Joker's Favor, where he's incredibly malevolent and threatening this ordinary citizen by making him commit or be complicit in a heinous act. And then there's also the episode Christmas with the Joker, where he's staging a wacky television special and singing the famous Jingle Bells Batman Smells ditty. And it's the same character. And he's brilliant at both. But in this movie, he's definitely pitched darker overall, but he still has those moments of pure comedy. And when I think of, like, for instance, one of the famous lines in the trailer was where he's turning around, he's got kind of a jaunty look on his face, he's like, "Can't be too careful with all these weirdos around." And you're just like, "Oh, Joker, you're just so wacky." But then there's also the moment when he's confronting Arthur Reeves in his office. And he's much more malevolent in that scene, still cracking jokes, but then it finishes on a scene where his entire face fills the screen, and his eyes are yellow, his teeth are yellow. There's no mercy at all in his face, and he is just cackling with absolute horrific, devilish glee. And that is, when I saw that, I'm like, the Joker has never been scarier than in that scene, where he is just, because if I was, remembering when I saw that when I was 7, 8 years old, that was terrifying. That was the first time you look at a character like that and you're like, this man is capable of anything. And we don't see the direct implications of it, but then we cut to the scene in the hospital where Arthur Reed. Yep, this is the scene. This is the scene. And Arthur Reeves is, has been dosed with the Joker's laughing gas, and he just now he's psychotic. His mind's been broken by the Joker, and you're just and you don't see exactly what happened, but he just has you realize that like what this man is capable of. This is why he is the ultimate evil in the world, in Batman's world. And he plays an interesting role in this movie because, as you noted, the central conflict is, for the most part, between Batman and the Phantasm, and then Batman and the police. The Joker kind of comes in at the end and kind of steals the third act. And part of that is because once the Phantasm is revealed to be Andrea, Batman isn't gonna like get into a knockdown fist fight with her. He still loves her, but so the Joker can be the antagonist, and the fact that both of them want to stop the Joker. Andrea wants to kill him. Batman wants to stop him, as he always does. That makes him like a pure chaos agent in an already like emotionally tortured situation, and that is where he thrives. So this, like, his role in this movie is not as big as you would think, but it's essential.
But like we were talking about with the movie itself, it feels like a larger than life, part of the film, even if he's actually in a small amount. But it just feels like he's so integral to, to everything, and it's actually a nice sort of spin on what we get in the Tim Burton Batman, with the Joker being responsible for making Batman who he is. In this, the Joker actually plays an instrumental part in turning Andrea into the Phantasm. Mm-hmm. And it's so great because the Joker sneaks into this movie. His first appearance is in flashback, and we don't realize who he is until later on. There's that great scene where Bruce has the pictures out, and he's like, and Alfred's like, something the matter, Master Bruce? And he's like, maybe. And he just takes out the marker with the paint and draws it on the face. He's like, oh no. And then you just hear the Joker's maniacal laughter. It's so great.
Yeah, that is one of those delightfully campy moments where it's that you're like, they're playing this to the hilt a bit, but it works because, well, Batman's going, oh no, we as the audience are going, oh yes. Yes, it is the Joker, and he is about to steal things right out from under our very noses. But it is interesting, as you note, the fact that, like, even though this movie doesn't quote unquote explore the Joker's backstory in the same way, it does give us a little bit of his origin in this universe, in the animated universe, in the sense that it seems to have been established that he was some kind of mob enforcer for Salvador Valestra and Buzz Bronchi and Chucky Soul, the mob bosses. And he kind of is still operating in the shadows as he, and at this stage he is much more like, he's not the same character that he will become once he has his accident that turns him into the Joker. But once he does, you can, like, there's a fascinating dynamic of thinking about what the power shift must have been like, because he starts off basically as the hitman for these mob bosses, and then by the time we're being introduced to him proper, and old Sally Valestra is going to seek his aid, he is terrified to go speak to the Joker, because he now knows this is where the ultimate power in the criminal underworld now lies. And the Joker is more than ready for the task, because, well, all of the other mob bosses fall pretty easily to Andrea the Phantasm's blade. The Joker figures her out, and he is ready to match her level of, vengeance and bloodthirstiness with his own distinctive style.
I just want to, like, talking about the Joker and his dynamic with, with everybody. I had pulled up some dialogue exchanges between the Joker and Arthur Reeves that I just read. It's after, Reeves is mad at the Gotham PD for not being able to get Batman, and then you just hear the Joker go, "Tisk tisk," and to think our tax money goes to pay those jerks. And he goes, that's right, Artie. Bring in the press, why don't you? What a photo of the councilman and his wacky pal. You're no friend of mine. Oh, Auntie, I'm crushed. How no the mighty forget? Don't you remember you, me, Sally, and the gang? It's just great because you just imagine, like, he's this enforcer for for the mob, and like, this is a guy that they lose control over at some point, and it's just like he becomes such a liability, but they can't do anything about it, so they just kind of all pray that he just leaves them alone.
Yeah.
And then Salvatore makes the very the bad decision to go to Joker. It's like he knows he's taking a risk, but, like, I'm sorry, you don't go as an old man, with an oxygen tank to go ask a favor of the Joker. It's like you're not getting out of there. But yeah, no, you're right and guilty. That's and that's personified in that final scene with the Joker, and I really like that we don't see his fate in this movie. Obviously, the character comes back in later episodes of the animated series and in other shows, but I kind of like that his fate is left undetermined in this movie, so that for all intents and purposes, Andrea, like, takes revenge, and there's definitely an interpretation that she kills him, and it's only by watching episodes. Like, it's just not a reality that the creators of this were going to be allowed to kill off the Joker, but they get as close to it as you can imagine they were allowed to to do. So I actually think it's done quite well.
Yeah, and Eric's point about the Joker's role being to drag several characters to hell, like that, we see that very explicitly in the iconography of, by the end, everything is in flames, and of course, the Joker and Andrea disappear in a literal puff of smoke as the Joker cackles. He is the devil in the flesh very much in this movie, and utterly unrepentant in his evil, but he also, like, he plays a very real part in the human drama of the story because he is the one who killed Andrea's father. It's heavily implied.
Yeah.
So she has every reason for wanting him dead, and the fact that she meets him on that level is a fascinating dynamic because when Joker interacts with Batman, he knows about Batman's no-kill rule, and part of the fun for him is trying to see how far he can push Batman and see if he can get him to break that rule and descend to his level, to his hellish level, and become as ugly as he is in that way. With Andrea, the Joker recognizes immediately, before Batman does, who the Phantasm is, and he knows, oh, you're already willing to kill me. So he still makes his jokes and stuff, but he recognizes her very much as an adversary on his level in that way, and so he doesn't play around with his food in the same way. He is like when Andrea confronts him, and he very much tells her, like, cut the act, I know who you are, and she removes her mask. Perhaps shouldn't have done that. That seemed to be working pretty well for her. But when they get into the fight and Andrea says, "You're not smiling, Joker. I thought you found death amusing." And Joker is like, "Oh, me? You won't hear a giggle out of me." And it's very much the fact that he is like, you are not the person who like I have this eternal dance with in the form of Batman. I am very much willing to kill you. And but of course she's also willing to kill him, and that's why their conflict becomes so vicious and intense. And like in that scene where it's wacky in the sense that like he triggers a giant fan to try to, you know, twist her up and like get her sucked into it, but he's very much trying to kill her. And if Batman had arrived, he would have. So we know that this man is not playing around, despite what he says, and in that way, he very much does echo what we will see in, for instance, Heath Ledger's interpretation of a Joker, who is very much in the idea of like, I wanted to see what you would do. How far can I push you? Can I make you fall as far as I have? And with Andrea, there's not as far to fall. She has already descended to his level in that respect. Even though she is still a good person, the fact that she's willing to kill has blackened her soul in that way.
Yeah, it's God, it's so good, and he even tries to, you know, appeal to like Batman's sense of like, he's like, tell her I already surrendered, Batman.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, it's just so good, and I was just trying to look up a bit of the dialogue when. Because there's this great moment before that. It's when you know, Batman actually figures out that that the Joker's ahead of him in, you know, deducing who the Phantasm is. And oh, where is it? No, that's not it. Oh, this is what I get. Trying to scroll up. Okay, here we go. Yeah, it's when Batman, you know, goes into Andrea's apartment, and the Joker's on the thing. It's like, "Hello, anybody home? Listen, Boopsy, even though you never call and you never write, I still got a soft spot for you. So I'm sending you a fun gift, airmail. And there's no use jumping out the window this time, toots." And, and it's great because that's the point where Bruce realizes that Andrea is the Phantasm, you know, and it's kind of great to see the villain like one up our hero on like figuring things out ahead of him, because it puts Batman on the back foot. And yeah, and then there was we were talking about when she confronts the Joker, and he goes, "I'm impressed, lady. You're harder to kill than a cockroach on steroids. So you figured it out. Gotta hand it to you. Nice scheme. Costume's a bit theatrical, but hey, who am I to talk?" Oh my God. Again, like he's just, Mark Hamill is just so great in this, and just so flawlessly, like we've been saying, he bounces between being threatening and just, you know, just like, and he cracks himself up, which is just all the better. Yeah. No, and it's so great that he's like bounces back and forth, and in this whole final sequence between, like, you know, as Guilty said, like, you know, dragging both Batman and Andrea down to hell, with him. And then also we get stuff like this. I think there's another shot where he's like peering through one of the buildings, and it's just, oh, by the way, and there's a funny moment where he's walking, behind some of the buildings, and one of the buildings has a big WB logo. But yeah, no, it's great because it gives us a big, wonderful, like, Batman Joker clash for the end of this movie. But that ultimately, what it really boils down to is this, the tragedy of him and Andrea when he's begging her to, to not let vengeance, consume her, and she literally, disappears in a puff of smoke with the Joker, as like, and you can imagine if this was more like adult themed, it is adult themed, but you know what I mean, like, adult, if it was a primarily adult targeted film, and it wasn't having to contend with bringing the Joker back for the animated series, you can imagine them just, literally going up in flames, and and we have to settle for her, disappearing in smoke with the Joker. But it boils down to the same idea.
Yeah, it's all wonderfully staged and theatrical, especially the fact that the Joker's hideout is in the ruins of the old Gotham World Fair, which we see Bruce and Andrea take their date on earlier in the movie, and it's the announcer's like, this is the city of the future where we will all live happily for the rest of our lives. And then, it's not subtle, but the fact that at the climax of the movie takes place there when it's in pure ruin and despair, and it's become the lair for the Joker, the lair for evil. That's the kind of thing that when I watched this movie as a kid, I didn't pick up on, and now I'm like, theme, parallel. But it works on an elemental level still, and in particular with the idea of like Bruce and Andrea's shattered future. The movie like actually even dares to tease us a little bit more, because when Bruce and Andrea first reunite, and they're very cold towards one another because Bruce is heartbroken and Andrea is consumed by her mission of vengeance. But then after he's pursuing her as the Phantasm, and then she rescues him from the chase during the police, they have a moment where they actually do reconcile. And we start to see that maybe this isn't broken. Maybe there is still a chance. Maybe these two still can have a future for her, because she knows that he is Batman at this point. And she's still willing to be with him. And like, that is not a deal breaker for her. He doesn't know her secret yet, but he's willing to, try to have this second chance with her. And of course, the tragedy is that now she's the one who can't let go of her vow to her parents. She says that, when she tells him like daddy doesn't matter anymore, meaning that, her father, is now gone, and this is not something that like he's influencing her decisions anymore. But the hole that he left in her heart, that has not been filled. And she believes that it can only be filled with vengeance. And that's why it's so tragic when in the final sequence, Bruce is now the one who's pleading with her, don't do this. Like, basically come away with me. We still can have this chance. And that's when she is like, I'm so sorry, my love. It had to end this way. And she is the one who makes the choice to take the Joker away and off to an unknown fate. And even if you haven't seen the rest of the animated series and it's left beautifully ambiguous, we do get that small grace note with her where we see that whatever choice she made, whether the Joker escaped from her or whether she killed him, which she didn't actually, but you could interpret it that way if this is all you've seen, it did not fulfill her. She is still alone. And the fact that Bruce and like his story ends when he goes back to the cave and he's devastated and he finds that she left the locket for him, the locket that has their picture in it that she's been wearing the entire movie, and the fact that she's now chosen to give him this so that he'll still have that memory of her, but now she doesn't have that memory. All she has left is the hole in her heart that will never go away.
Yeah, and I love the there's that exchange, and when he confronts her, at the Joker's hideout, and uh, it's when she says, "They took everything, Bruce. My father, my friends, my life, you. I'm not saying it's right or even sane, but it's all I have left. So either help me or get out of the way. You know I can't do that. Look what they did to us. What we could have had, they had to pay. But Andy, what will vengeance solve? If anyone knows the answer to that, Bruce, it's you." Oh,
yeah. Which, of
so good.
course, it's heartbreaking and it's a beautiful piece of writing, and of course, it ties into the scene that is perhaps the like if this movie has a central thematic thesis, it's the one that Alfred details in one of the next to last scenes, the scene we both quoted when we were promoting this episode, where she like Andrea believes that Batman and Bruce are motivated by vengeance, and that he'll be able to understand that she can't let it go, even if it breaks both their hearts. But of course, Bruce, while he still has this great grand quest that he is fulfilling, he's also doing it because he has something more to fight for. He is protecting Gotham. He's not just doing this for vengeance at this point. And that's what makes him a hero, whereas Andrea still at this point now has to fall into, anti-hero at best, villain, assassin at worst. And it's because of what Alfred says when he, counsels Bruce that vengeance blackens the soul, Bruce. I always feared that you would become that which you fought against. You walk the edge of that abyss every night, but you haven't fallen in, and I thank heaven for that. But Miss Andy fell into that abyss years ago. And that crystallizes it right there. It's not like the most complex message you could ever envision for a movie like this. It doesn't need to be. These are still elemental ideas and archetypes. Batman is a very elemental and archetypical character, and the idea that vengeance won't heal your heart, won't heal your soul, that is a story that has been told again and again and again and again and again throughout the Batman story. Like, that's one of the things I love the most in Matt Reeves' The Batman movie, where he is on this quest, declaring that I'm vengeance. But by the end of the movie, he realizes, no, I need to be something more. I need to be a symbol of hope for the people. And he comes to that realization, and that's the emotional catharsis of the movie. And this movie tells a similar story with a bit more of a bittersweet, tragic angle to it, but it's still the same idea, and it has rarely been told so well as it is here, because you feel every emotional beat of it, and every element of the story serves that idea, and it just leaves you devastated but also fulfilled. You're muted.
Sorry about that. No, that moment just hits so hard, especially because Alfred, is always like, he's the reliable, part of Bruce's life, or he's always there for him. And, and a lot of his moments in this film are sort of comic relief. And so I think it hits you all the harder, when he comes in at this moment at the end, to comfort Bruce, and, um, and shows that faith that he has in him. And it's beautiful, because a lot of what we see from Alfred in this film is him trying to sort of talk him into walking away from this life, and finding something more. And so I think it actually really says a lot, what he says to Bruce. The fact that, um, I think he would probably be a lot more aggressive in trying to dissuade Bruce from this if he didn't feel like he was, you know, uh, walking that line, the way he is. If he felt him more descending into the darkness, then I think he'd be even more aggressive in trying to dissuade Bruce from this. But there's that respect between the two of them. And then the fact that Alfred is there for him to support him, so long as he feels like he's on the good path, and, and you feel like the moment that Bruce isn't, Alfred would be there to catch him. And, and it's just really emotional, because, uh, Alfred is just one of those characters, no matter the adaptation, where he's just so, integral to Bruce's emotional story. And, and yeah, this is another one of those times where I just, I think this adaptation of Alfred is so beautiful. And we've had a lot of great Alfreds, over it's actually one of the elements in the Batman films where I should probably say that I don't have much of a preference, because I think that we've gotten a lot of really distinctive and beautiful portrayals of Alfred. Part of me will always love Michael Gough from the Tim Burton films, but then we got Michael Caine, in the Christopher Nolan movies, which was just like a total treat. I remember when Batman Begins was announced, and it's like, I'm sorry, we're getting who? um, um, and yeah, and this portrayal of Alfred, though, he is just, such a stalwart, supporter of Bruce in such a beautiful way. And talking what I said before about he gets a lot of comedic lines in this, I absolutely love. You think you know everything about me, don't you? I dive on your bottom. I very well ought to, sir. And then and then I don't remember exactly how the line goes, but it's like, what rot, sir? Why, you're the very model of sanity. By the way, oh God, what is?
Oh, he's like, I pressed your tights and put away your exploding gas balls.
Thank you, Alfred. And on that note, I really want to start to close things out by praising Kevin Conroy.
Yeah.
Because he's been mentioned a couple times in this stream, and I feel like it kind of goes without saying, but I do want to say it. Like, for me, he is the iconic portrayal of Bruce Wayne and Batman. Like, when I think of Batman, I think of Kevin Conroy, and I am very blessed to have actually met him at a convention back in 2019. I recounted this last week, but it was so great. I went up to get his autograph, and I also got my picture taken with him, and just I'll never forget it as long as I live. Just, talking to him for a couple minutes and getting so like excited and giddy, and I just blurted out, "I can't believe I'm talking to Batman." And then he leans in real close and goes, "No, now you're talking to Batman." And it's just one of the geekiest, wonderful, most wonderful moments of my life, and I cherish it even more now that he's sadly passed away. I will never forget that. And I got a wonderful like mini poster autographed by him, and I have a picture, of me with him, and I cherish both of those. Just for people who grew up with this series, it's just they're like, I have a lot of love and affection for other actors who've played the part, especially Michael Keaton. But like, I guarantee you, anytime I pick up a Batman comic book, I hear Kevin Conroy's voice.
Yeah.
There's just no doubt about it. And to have the the 1-2 punch of Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill together, like any production that had the two of those, playing these roles was just like, all the better for it. I think they did it for like video games and and other animated adaptations. I know they came back for that version of The Killing Joke that was put out, and it's just it. I don't think you'll find two more iconic, actors for these roles, especially in the realm of animation, but even outside of that. And yeah, and just rest in peace, Kevin Conroy, because there'll never be another one like him.
Yeah, he was special. There, I don't usually get overly emotionally like devastated at celebrity deaths, not because it's not sad, but because I recognize that I have a parasocial relationship to these people at best, and so and there are people in their lives who are very intimately connected with them. We're mourning someone very close to them, so I try not to be overly effusive in my public grief when someone like this passes. But Kevin Conroy's death was one of the celebrity losses that hit me hardest. And I had a hard time, reconciling with it after the fact that this man was gone, because he just seemed eternal. And because of his performance as Batman, he will be eternal because he voiced the character in so many different media across his career, most notably in the Batman animated series, including this movie and all the subsequent sequel series, all the Justice League series, Batman Beyond. He even did briefly portray Bruce Wayne in in live action in one of the CW shows, I believe. So he has that marker as well. And then in the Arkham games, he's iconic there as well. But he was Batman. He, a lot of times when people think about like all the incredible actors we've been fortunate enough to have to portray Batman, and everyone has who they think is the best. And I think all of them have done wonderful things with the role. Adam West, Michael Keaton, Val Kilmer, George Clooney, Christian Bale, Ben Affleck, Robert Pattinson, and there's going to be a new DCU Batman. I'm sure that will be a great actor as well. But Kevin Conroy is the standard. He is Batman. And when people talk about, for instance, who is the best Batman in a movie, and I found myself tortured thinking about that question, but then I remembered Kevin Conroy voiced Batman in a movie. In this movie, he's the answer. He always will be the answer. He is Batman.
Yeah.
He is and as long as I can like acknowledge that, I'm like, then I can have fun debating whether or not I prefer Christian Bale or Robert Pattinson or Michael Keaton, because I always know that Kevin Conroy is there. Kevin Conroy is Batman, and he will, you know, that will never change, you know, and because what he did with this role was a gift, and I very much feel that his performance in this movie is perhaps his best work as the character, because he gets to do so much with the role. You know, I mentioned earlier that he himself had cited the scene where Bruce is at his parents' grave and pleading with them for the right to essentially be able to live his own life and be happy with Andrea, as one of his favorite scenes that he's ever done with the character. People always think about like his famous "I am vengeance, I am the night, I am Batman" from the animated series, which is probably his most iconic piece of voice work as the character. I think that this might be his best, because it's so human, it's so relatable, and it speaks so much to the core of Bruce Wayne as the character, because he's not just Batman, he is the definitive Bruce Wayne as well, in my eyes, and the two are inextricable, and he's inextricable from this role. And I just, rewatching it after his death, like, this is not typically a movie that I like that reduces me to like a puddle of tears. It's very emotional. I do get teary-eyed, particularly in that scene. That viewing really like wrecked me, because I'm just like, I can't believe this man is gone. But now, with a little bit more of time and distance, I don't have that same reaction anymore, because I'm just like, I can't believe I still get to hear Kevin Conroy as Batman. He is just that important to me and always will be. So thank you for the gift of this role, Kevin Conroy. I hope
Yeah, and that's another like beautiful thing about animation that probably doesn't get touched on as much as it really, there's an element of immortality that that is present in animated creations, and especially the performances we got, because like an actor's age, or what point they are in their lives, like that doesn't factor into it, because it's a vocal performance, and it just somehow feels very eternal, as we're watching this and listening to Kevin Conroy's performance. And I've been thinking about that a lot, especially watching X-Men '97 this week, and listening to these voices from my childhood come back up, and the fact that it's been like 30 years since since it was on before. There is that element of that's the beauty of animation, that it can be timeless in a way that that not that other mediums can't be, but it's just in a different way, and in a very beautiful way. But and on that note, I feel like that's a great closing note. But is there anything else that you wanted to say about the film?
The only thing that I'll say is that, we've made a lot of connections to the fact that this was, directly a branch off the animated series. And so sometimes people can think about the fact that, like, oh, is this just basically an extended episode of the show? Or is this like a direct to DVD movie, which was the original plan? No, this is a movie. Even though it's only 77 minutes long, this movie feels epic and worthy of the big screen, even though I've never had a chance to see it in that format. I hope I do one day. And part of that is just the epic character work that we've gushed about, and the vocal performances and the music, but also the scale. You know, there are action sequences in this movie, like the scene when Batman is chasing the Phantasm, and you know, the cops pursue him, and he is very much on the ropes, and you really feel like he might be about to be caught. Like that's an action sequence that is on a higher scale than what you typically see in the animated series, because they had the opportunity to do this as a feature film, and it's thrilling, and it's beautiful, and it's tense as hell, and it's scary. There's blood involved, which, you know, is something they could not do on the animated series, but they were able to lean into it more for this, given the liberties of this tone. And even though this movie did not get the opportunity to really financially succeed at the box office, because they put it out without much marketing and only stayed there for a few weeks, I truly feel that over time, the Batman fandom in general, has recognized that this is one of the best Batman stories we have ever been privileged enough to see on screen. And it is rightfully held in that kind of regard. And I just really hope that over time, people will continue to acknowledge it as such, because as time passes and we continue to get new Batman stories, it would become easier and easier for this to fade a little bit into the background, because it didn't have the same lasting cultural impact in that way, but it absolutely deserves to. And again, when I remember that this has now been in our lives for 30 years, I'm just like, more people need to see and celebrate this movie, because the ones who know, this is where it's at.
Well, it's funny that you say about its cultural footprint, because I do feel like it very much depends on your perspective. Because for me, you know, and it's interesting because the world was so different back then, and your notions of what films or shows or or anything make a cultural footprint were largely dependent upon your own perspective and your own point of view. And for me, this has always been a very big part of the Batman franchise and the story of Batman. Um, and it's funny because you talk about new iterations of Batman coming along, and it being easy for something like this to fade. And I actually, maybe it's the self-absorbed part of me talking, but I actually feel the opposite, because I think it's a part of me as I get older. I'm sort of feeling okay with holding on to the things that matter to me, and not getting so like consumed or bent out of shape over like new iterations of things. Because, and it's probably a lesson that, not to say that I'm to make myself holier than thou or anything, but it's probably a lesson other people care to learn. Like, if you don't love a new version of something, just hold that thing that you do love closer, and enjoy the love that you have for that. Part of the great joy of Batman the Animated Series getting remastered in high definition, and I do own the Blu-ray set, is that that series is preserved in a beautiful form. Same thing goes for the Tim Burton Batman films, and any other iteration of Batman. So I've always felt like, because I have those versions of Batman which mean the most to me, and they've been so lovingly taken care of in terms of like home video releases, like I'm taken care of, and culture can do what it will with Batman, and I will either like or dislike things to come. I very much enjoyed the Batman. Enjoyed some of the other like DC iterations of the character from the past few years a little less, but it didn't really matter to me because I can always go back and I can enjoy, you know, the things that I love, and so this film and Batman the Animated Series will always be eternal for me, and I can always go back and just uh, immerse myself in that love I have for the storytelling, and
Yeah.
And yeah, so it takes a lot of pressure off for me, you know, when looking ahead to future iterations of where the franchise might go, because I have like my personal, you know, version of Batman that I will always hold close, and if the culture moves on, that's fine, but you know, but I'll continue to love that thing that I love, and you know, but then we get stuff like, you know, the Dark Knight trilogy and the Batman that, you know, and we talked about in the stream for the Batman how there were some elements of Batman the Animated Series that we even like saw, you know, kind of utilized in the creation of that. I think that the Batman takes a lot from the dynamic between Batman and Catwoman from the animated series, and it was fun to see that. So I think that the animated series continues to have a footprint, um, you know, in the franchise at large, and but I'm still holding out for when somebody utilizes that Shirley Walker music.
Yeah, and that's kind of gets into what I was getting at, because my love for this movie and my personal affection for it in the place it holds in my heart, that is always going to be unchanged. Like, and I don't need other people to, you know, validate that. You know, I love what I love, and what's important to me is what is important to me, and this movie is one of those things that is important to me, and it always will be. So it is just an inescapable fact. This movie is not Batman 1989. It is not The Dark Knight. It is not regarded in the same way because, frankly, just it's the honest truth. Not as many people have seen this movie. Not as many people even know that this movie exists. I have talked to people who are, you know, are just out and about in the world, and when I tell them about Batman Mask of the Phantasm, they don't know what it is. And I just feel that's tragic in the sense that it is one of the best Batman stories ever told. And the fact that it's animated and it came out 30 years ago means that it's easier to forget that. But when I watch it, I am just like, this movie is just like when I saw it for the first time. It's like it hasn't changed at all. It's timeless. It holds up. Part of that is the aesthetic of the animated series, which is very much that kind of gothic feel that also has a little bit of retro futuristic quality to it that means you can't place it in a specific era, so it always will be of its time, but also a part. But really, I say what I say just to say that more people should give this movie a chance if you haven't seen it. It really does. It deserves that look, and not to say that other people need to love it as much as I do, because it, you know, it came out at a very specific time, and like, you know, when you see it at this era, you're not going to necessarily have the same attachment to it. But the story is the story. The story is timeless, and if I were to ever, you know, introduce someone to Batman and like what is a quintessential Batman story, I might choose to show them this movie, because I really feel it tells you everything that you would ever want to know about the character in in the context of a beautifully told tale that is thematically and emotionally rich, and I just don't ever want that to be lost.
And one other thing I'll say, you know, in response to what you were just saying earlier, that some people might just think, oh, it's an extended episode of the TV show. If you want to see a film that they put out that plays very much like an extended episode, they did put out another film that was a direct to DVD movie called Sub-Zero, which was about Mr. Freeze, which is very well done, but it does very much feel like that's like an extended episode of the television show. This is different. This is a grand story. This feels cinematic. And so I would say that, you know, I would implore others to not like go into it with that kind of skepticism. It's, you know, it's deserving of its standing as one of the finest cinematic outings for Batman. And yeah, my hope is that it's honestly us doing this stream, you know, even if, you know, and not that many people, you know, watch the stream, or even, you know, if it's a blip on some people's radar that we, you know, even did a stream about this movie. I do hope that somebody saw it and was like, oh, I'll check that out. And because it's, you know, if that happens, I'll consider it a victory, because every person who decides to check out the film, I consider that a small victory.
Indeed. Yeah. This very much may fall into the whole one for us kind of idea, even on this very small personal channel. But that's okay, because if we were choosing from a very short list of movies that were just like one for us because it's just that important to us, this movie would be on that list for me. So I'm very glad that we got a chance to talk about it.
Yeah. All right. And with that said, I think we're pretty much done. We, you know, talked about a 77-minute movie for
we
2 hours.
doubled the runtime, which was but the movie warrants it. The movie is that.
Yeah. Once again, I'll just say next week is my birthday, so we'll be doing a special stream next week, and we'll be talking about the 1995 film Goldeneye, which was my first James Bond movie. So we're going to have a lot of fun with that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to just geeking out, talking about our experiences, both watching the movie and the video game, because they're all tied together for me. It was such a cultural moment that, you know, even though I think the video game actually came out a couple years after the movie, because it took them so long to actually finalize the game. But it was worth the wait, because that was one of my favorite video games for years. And it just makes me a bit bummed out that I don't have that I don't still have an N64 and GoldenEye video game cartridge. I was out with Nessie and Trish when they came, or when we drove up. Both Nessie and I drove to meet Trish, and we spent the day out, and we were at a comic book shop, and they had a video game section, and they actually had an N64 and a GoldenEye cartridge, and I almost spent a bunch of money on that. And I said to them, talk me out of it, guys. And they did. They talked me off the ledge. But part of me wishes I'd gone for it, because it would be a lot of fun to dive into that. But then I would never leave the house. So
one day.
Yeah. But yeah, so we'll be doing that. Then the week after that, we'll be doing we'll be catching up on the Bad Batch, and talking about the next batch of episodes. Sorry, had to do it. And yeah, and then we'll see what's coming down the line after that. I'm really looking forward to seeing what's ahead on that show, because I've got some bad feelings about like a certain mystery character that we've been seeing, and I don't want it to be what I think it is.
Yeah. But on the bright side, I have a strong personal suspicion that the episode this week is going to be the episode where that character comes back. Not the mystery character you were referring to, the other character. I think that we might be in for that. But if not, we shall see.
Yeah, we'll see. One of the really nice things is that I really don't have that much of a clue like what's ahead for us, except for the dread of that one thing that we're alluding to. But other than that, I don't know exactly where we're headed for the rest of the season, and I'm very excited about that. And yeah, but also dreading it, because I want all of our beloved batch to be, happy, healthy, and safe.
Yeah, well, the good news is that this show has never ever ever broken our hearts before, and I see no reason to think.
Oh yeah, never. Well, look, we saw Crosshair doing yoga this week.
Oh, that was
going
so
to be
great.
fine.
Yeah.
Everything's going to be fine.
Animation is for kids, y'all.
Well, it's so like I always go back to. I didn't want to go down this road because we're supposed to be wrapping this episode up, and I'm going to say something contentious. But I always go back to like, last year, the week that the Outpost aired, and that was also the week where they had the Jack Black and Lizzo episode of The Mandalorian. And I just remember being like, okay, which show was for kids again? But I don't know. That's an uphill battle. I know. But we'll get there one day.
Yeah.
But yeah, and on that non-controversial note, we'll end the stream. And thank you, Guilty, for joining us. We appreciate it. Yeah, and yeah, we knew this was probably going to be a small audience for this one, but that's fine. Sometimes it's we just want to talk about a movie, and we're just overjoyed when if anybody joins us, then then that's a good thing. But yeah, I think this was a well warranted discussion, and no matter how many people we had joining us, because it's a movie that we both love, and I think we had a really good time talking about it, or at least I hope so. We went over twice as long as the movie, so so it's certainly to be hoped. But yeah, and next week will be fun. A lot of goofiness abound, I'm sure, and I'll try and I will probably try to guilt more people into joining us next week. I'll be like, it's my birthday. You have to spend time with us on my birthday. And you are absolutely right, Guilty. As if we haven't made it clear by this point, like this movie is just out of this world fantastic. And I had a couple editions sitting by of the movie that I actually own, because I have both the Blu-ray version and the 4K version right here. The only thing I regret is that I don't still have the old clamshell VHS edition that I had when I was younger. Remember those, Jared, that would squeak as you opened them?
Oh, I do. I don't think I have any of those either. But that I definitely would. I would love to revisit this movie in that format where you have to be kind and rewind. But in the meantime, I'm just happy to have access to it. I have it as part of my Batman the Animated Series complete series disc. It came with it. But that 4K cover that you showed me, I'm like, once I get a 4K TV, that's going to be one of my first purchases. That.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the only thing that the only gripe I have about that edition is that it doesn't also include the 4:3 version of the movie, which the production of this film has a complicated history because, as you described, they only decided about partway through the production to make it a theatrical release. So some of the shots were designed to be shown on 4:3 television, and some of them were designed with the widescreen in mind. So it's kind of a mixed mash of, you know, some of it looks better in one version, some of it looks better in the other. But I'm still glad I watched the widescreen version today because it very much felt like reliving a theatrical experience. So, but anyway, that's why I still have the Blu-ray version because that actually has both of them. So, okay, we've gone on long enough. Before we hit the 3-hour mark, we'll say goodnight. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will see you next week. Hope you all have a lovely night. Bye.
Take care.